Whispering Pines, Arkansas, 1865. Carrie Prescott ran through the windstorm with a wooden box pressed against her ribs, knowing the photograph plate inside could hang an innocent man, or save him, depending on who saw it first. She had made an enemy in the last town, a powerful enemy, and when she fled to this cliffside Mesa village hoping to disappear, she brought a secret that would not stay buried. The wind tore at her skirts and ripped a shingle from the nearest roof, sending it spinning into the street. She ducked and kept moving toward the land office, but the building ahead had already lost half its roof to the gale. Papers swirled in the air like desperate birds. Behind her, Horace Ashford stood on the porch of his fine house, his white shirt spotless despite the chaos, his hand resting on a Bible as he watched her with cold calculation. He wanted her land, the 20 acres by the river crossing that her late husband had left her. And he had forged deeds ready to claim it the moment the new territorial judge signed them. But the judge had disappeared 3 days ago, vanished on his way into town. And now the windstorm had everyone trapped on the mesa with nowhere to run and truth closing in from all sides. Carrie pushed through the door of the general store and stumbled inside, breathing hard. The storekeeper, an old man with worried eyes, shook his head. "The ferry is down. No one is crossing the river until this blows over. You are stuck here, miss." Carrie nodded and moved toward the back, where a narrow staircase led to the rooms above. She rented a corner room with a single window facing the cliffs, and she climbed the stairs quickly, the box heavy in her arms. Inside the room, she set the box on the small table and opened it with shaking hands. The glass plate lay wrapped in cloth, the image fixed in silver. A man standing over a body in the street, a knife in his hand, his face clear in the sunlight. But the man in the photograph was not the killer. Carrie had been there that day, in the last town. She had seen the real murderer step back into the shadows, while this man, a stranger passing through, bent to help the dying victim. The photographer had captured only that moment, the wrong moment, and the town had nearly lynched the stranger before Carrie spoke up. She told them what she saw, but the real killer was the son of a wealthy rancher, and her testimony made her a target. She fled with the plate, hoping to reach a federal marshal, but the storm had trapped her here. And now, Horace Ashford knew she had something he wanted silenced. A knock sounded at her door, firm and deliberate. Carrie grabbed the plate and slid it under the mattress, then opened the door a crack. A man stood in the dim hallway, tall and lean, with dark brown hair and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a simple gray shirt and dark trousers, a gun belt low on his hips, and his face had the hard lines of someone who had seen too much.
"Miss Prescott, my name is Frederick Garrett. I need to speak with you about Horace Ashford."
Carrie kept the door mostly closed.
"I do not know you."
"I know. But I know Ashford is trying to take your land, and I know he is not doing it legally. I also know you have something he wants, something that could ruin him if it got into the right hands."
Carrie felt her pulse quicken.
"Why would you care about my trouble?"
"Because Ashford is a smuggler. He has been running guns and stolen goods across the border for 2 years, using forged deeds to cover his tracks. I have been tracking him, and I need evidence to bring him down. If you have something, we can help each other."
Carrie studied his face, looking for deceit, but saw only steady determination. She opened the door wider.
"Come in. But if you are lying, I will shoot you myself."
Frederick stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The wind howled against the window, rattling the frame. He glanced around the small room, then looked at her directly.
What do you have?
Carrie hesitated, then pulled the plate from under the mattress and unwrapped it carefully. Frederick leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the image.
This is a murder.
Yes. But the man in the picture did not do it. I saw the real killer, and I testified. The killer's father is rich, and he sent men after me. I ran.
And Ashford knows you have this.
He knows I have something. I do not think he knows what, but he wants me gone. And he wants my land. The new judge was supposed to arrive and stop him, but the judge disappeared.
Frederick's jaw tightened.
The judge did not disappear. Ashford had him killed. I found the body 2 days ago in a ravine 5 miles out. Ashford could not risk the judge looking into his land claims.
Carrie felt the room tilt.
Then we have no law here. No one to stop him.
We have each other. And we have evidence. If we can get that plate to the federal marshal in Little Rock, Ashford will hang. But first, we have to survive the night. He will come for you once he realizes you are not leaving.
The window shattered inward, glass exploding across the floor. Carrie and Frederick threw themselves to the floor as wind roared into the room, scattering papers and extinguishing the lantern. Frederick rolled to his feet and drew his revolver, moving to the side of the broken window. He peered out carefully, then pulled back.
2 men on the street. Ashford's hired guns. They are watching the building.
Carrie crawled to the table and grabbed the box, wrapping the plate again.
We need to get out.
The back stairs. Move.
They ran into the hallway and down the narrow back staircase, emerging into the alley behind the store. The wind slammed into them, nearly knocking Carrie off her feet. Frederick caught her arm and pulled her close, shouting over the gale.
The livery stable. We can hide there until they pass.
They ran through the storm, ducking debris and clinging to the sides of buildings. The livery stable loomed ahead, its large doors swinging wildly in the wind. Frederick shoved one door open and pushed Carrie inside, then pulled the door shut and dropped the crossbar into place. The stable was dark and smelled of hay and horses. 2 animals stamped nervously in their stalls, eyes rolling. Carrie leaned against a post, catching her breath. The box still clutched in her hands. Frederick moved to a crack in the wall and looked out toward the street.
They are coming this way.
Carrie looked around the stable, searching for options. A ladder led up to the loft, and a back door stood at the far end, secured with a heavy bolt.
We can go out the back.
They will expect that. We need to make them think we left, then double back.
He grabbed a saddle blanket and a coil of rope, then climbed the ladder to the loft. Carrie followed, the box awkward in her arms. Frederick spread the blanket over a pile of hay near the back wall and motioned for her to lie down.
Stay low. Do not move.
Carrie lay flat, the blanket pulled over her and the box. Frederick crouched beside her, his revolver ready. Below, the stable door rattled, then crashed open. 2 men stepped inside, their boots loud on the wooden floor. Carrie held her breath, her heart hammering. One of the men spoke, his voice rough. They were here. Tracks in the dust. The second man moved toward the back door. Door is still bolted from inside. They went up. Footsteps on the ladder. Carrie's hand found Frederick's arm, gripping tight. He raised his revolver, aiming at the top of the ladder. A head appeared, silhouetted against the faint light from below. Frederick fired. The shot cracked through the stable, and the man jerked backward, his hat flying off as he tumbled from the ladder. The second man shouted and fired blindly upward, bullets punching through the loft floor. Frederick rolled to the side, dragging Carrie with him, and returned fire. The man below cursed and ran for the door. Frederick jumped to his feet and fired again, and the man stumbled but kept going, disappearing into the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the nervous stamping of horses. Frederick reloaded quickly, his hands steady.
We need to move now. Ashford will send more men.
Carrie stood, clutching the box.
Where can we go? The whole town is trapped.
There is a canyon trail on the east side of the mesa. It leads down to the river. If we can reach it before Ashford blocks it, we can cross and get to Little Rock.
The ferry is down.
I know a ford 2 miles south. It is rough, but we can make it.
They climbed down from the loft and moved to the back door. Frederick unbolted it and stepped out into the storm, scanning the alley. The wind had grown worse, tearing at everything in its path. Roofs groaned and cracked. A water barrel tumbled past, crashing into a wall. Frederick took Carrie's hand and pulled her forward, moving fast along the backs of buildings. They reached the edge of town and started down a narrow trail that clung to the cliff face. The drop to the river was steep and littered with rocks. Carrie's boots slipped on loose gravel, and Frederick caught her, steadying her.
Stay close. Watch your footing.
They descended carefully, the wind pushing at their backs. Halfway down, a shout echoed from above. Carrie looked up and saw Horace Ashford standing at the top of the trail, his Bible tucked under one arm, a rifle in his hands. 3 men stood with him, all armed. Ashford's voice carried over the storm, cold and precise. Miss Prescott, you have something that belongs to me. Bring it back, and I will let you live. Frederick pulled Carrie behind a boulder and drew his revolver.
Keep going. I will hold them off.
No. We stay together.
Ashford fired, the bullet ricocheting off the rock above their heads. Frederick returned fire, and one of Ashford's men ducked.
Go. Now.
Carrie grabbed his arm.
I am not leaving you.
Frederick looked at her, his gray eyes fierce.
Then, we fight together.
They moved down the trail, staying low, as bullets whined past them. The trail narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Frederick went first, firing back over his shoulder. Carrie followed, the box pressed against her chest. A bullet struck the cliff face beside her, showering her with rock chips. She stumbled, and Frederick caught her hand, pulling her forward. The trail ended at a rocky ledge above the river. The water churned below, swollen and fast from the storm. Frederick scanned the area, then pointed to a fallen tree that bridged a gap to the far bank.
There. We can cross.
That tree will not hold us both.
It will, if we move fast.
Ashford and his men reached the ledge, spreading out to cut off any retreat. Ashford raised his rifle, his face calm and certain. Nowhere left to run, Miss Prescott. Give me the plate, and I will make your death quick." Carrie looked at Frederick, then at the tree. She made her decision.
Take the box. Get it to the marshal.
Not without you.
She kissed him, fast and hard, then shoved the box into his hands and ran for the tree. Frederick shouted her name, but she was already halfway across, her arms outstretched for balance. The tree groaned under her weight, shifting on the rocks. Ashford fired, and the bullet grazed her shoulder. She cried out, but kept moving, reaching the far side and dropping to solid ground. Frederick fired at Ashford, forcing him to take cover, then ran for the tree himself. He moved across the tree with the box and his revolver, bullets striking the wood around him. The tree shifted, one end slipping on wet rock. Frederick lunged forward, throwing himself onto the far bank as the tree broke free and tumbled into the river. He rolled to his feet and grabbed Carrie, pulling her into the cover of the rocks. Ashford cursed and fired again, but the distance was too great. Frederick and Carrie scrambled up the far side of the canyon, climbing toward the road that led south. The storm raged around them, but they kept moving, putting distance between themselves and Ashford. An hour later, they reached the ford. The river was high, the current strong, but Frederick found a shallow crossing marked by stones. He took Carrie's hand, and they waded in together, the cold water rising to their waists. The current pulled at them, trying to sweep them downstream, but they held on to each other and pushed forward. They reached the far side and collapsed on the muddy bank, breathing hard. Carrie's shoulder ached where the bullet had grazed her, blood soaking her sleeve. Frederick tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped the wound tightly.
Can you ride?
Yes.
They found a horse tied near the road, left by a traveler seeking shelter. Frederick helped Carrie into the saddle, then climbed up behind her, the box secured in a saddlebag. They rode through the storm, heading for Little Rock. Behind them, on the far side of the river, Horace Ashford watched them disappear into the rain, his Bible clutched in his white-knuckled hands. 3 days later, Carrie and Frederick reached Little Rock. The federal marshal listened to their story, examined the photograph plate, and dispatched a team of deputies to Whispering Pines. Horace Ashford was arrested for the murder of the territorial judge, smuggling, and attempted murder. His forged deeds were exposed, and the land he had stolen was returned to its rightful owners, including Carrie's 20 acres by the river crossing. The photograph plate was sent to the town where the original murder occurred, and the real killer was arrested and tried. The innocent man was exonerated and released. Carrie and Frederick testified at Ashford's trial. The smuggler stood in the dock with his Bible, his face calm even as the guilty verdict was read. He was sentenced to hang, and the execution was carried out 2 weeks later. With Ashford gone and her land secure, Carrie returned to Whispering Pines to rebuild. Frederick rode with her, no longer hiding his past. He told her the truth over a campfire one night, his voice steady but careful.
I was a Confederate officer. When the war ended, I could not go home. Too much blood, too many mistakes. I went undercover, tracking smugglers and criminals, trying to do something right. I could not tell you before, because if Ashford found out, he would have killed me and anyone I was protecting.
Carrie listened, the firelight flickering on her face.
You protected me. You risked everything.
I would do it again.
She reached across the fire and took his hand.
Then stay. Help me rebuild. We can start over together.
Frederick looked at her for a long moment, then nodded.
I would like that.
They returned to Whispering Pines as the storm finally broke and the sky cleared. The town was battered but standing. Roofs needed repair, and debris littered the streets, but the people were already rebuilding. Carrie's small cabin by the river crossing had lost its roof, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. She and Frederick dismounted and walked through the property, assessing the damage. Frederick picked up a fallen beam and set it aside.
It will take work, but we can fix it. If you will have me.
Carrie smiled for the first time in weeks.
I will have you.
They worked through the day, clearing debris and salvaging what they could. By evening, the sky had turned orange and gold. The storm fully passed. Snow began to fall, light and unexpected, dusting the ground and the broken barn door. Carrie and Frederick stood in the barn doorway, watching the snow settle. Frederick turned to her, his face serious.
I need to tell you everything. My real name, where I came from, what I did in the war, all of it.
Carrie looked up at him, her green eyes steady.
Then tell me.
He did. He told her about the battles he fought, the orders he followed, the men he lost. He told her about the guilt that followed him, the need to make things right, the years he spent alone. When he finished, Carrie took his hands in hers.
You are not that man anymore. You are the man who saved my life, who stood beside me when no one else would. That is the man I see.
And you. You are the woman who would not run, who fought for the truth even when it nearly killed her. You are stronger than anyone I have ever known.
She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air.
I was afraid for so long. Afraid of what I saw, afraid of what would happen if I spoke up. But with you, I am not afraid anymore.
I am not afraid either. Not as long as I am with you.
He kissed her then, slow and certain, the snow falling around them. When they pulled apart, Carrie smiled, her face lit with something that had been missing for too long.
Stay with me. Not just for the rebuilding. Stay with me, always.
Always.
They stood in the doorway, the snow falling softly on the ruined barn, and the land that was finally, truly theirs. The truth was out. The villain was gone. And they were together, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The storms had passed, and what remained was love, hard-won and fierce, built on trust and truth, spoken out loud at last. Carrie and Frederick turned back to the cabin, hand in hand, ready to build something new together. The river crossing would be theirs to guard. The land would be theirs to work, and the future, uncertain but bright, would be theirs to share. The snow fell heavier, covering the broken places, and in the stillness, everything felt clean and possible. They walked inside together, closing the door on the cold. And the story of Carrie Prescott and Frederick Garrett became one that the people of Whispering Pines would tell for years to come. The woman who would not be silenced, the man who would not let her face the darkness alone, and the love that survived the storm. They spent the winter rebuilding. The snow fell often, covering the cliffs and the river crossing in white, and the work was slow and hard. Frederick repaired the cabin roof, replacing broken shingles and ceiling gaps against the cold. Carrie salvaged what she could from the barn, sorting through tools and supplies that had been scattered by the storm. They worked side by side, their breath steaming in the cold air. And at night they sat by the fire and talked. Frederick told her about the places he had been, the towns he had passed through while tracking criminals. Carrie told him about the life she had built before the storm, the garden she had planted, the plans she had made. They learned each other slowly, in the quiet hours between work and sleep, and the trust between them deepened. The people of Whispering Pines watched them with curiosity and respect. The story of Carrie and Frederick had spread quickly. The woman who had exposed Horace Ashford, the man who had helped her bring him to justice. Some of the townsfolk offered help, bringing food or lending tools, and Carrie accepted gratefully. She was no longer alone, and the weight of isolation that had pressed on her for so long lifted. By early spring, the cabin was whole again, the roof sealed and the windows replaced. The barn door hung straight on new hinges, and Frederick had built a small corral for the horses. Carrie planted her garden, turning the soil and setting seeds in neat rows. Frederick worked on the fences, repairing posts and stringing wire. They moved through the days with purpose, building something that belonged to both of them. One morning in late March, a rider came from Little Rock with a letter. The federal marshal wrote to inform them that the trial of the man who had been falsely accused was complete. He had been exonerated, and the real killer had been convicted. The photograph plate, which had caused so much trouble, had finally done what it was meant to do: reveal the truth. Carrie read the letter aloud to Frederick, her voice steady. When she finished, she folded the paper and tucked it into her apron pocket.
It is over.
It is over.
Frederick put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood together in the morning light, looking out over the land. The river crossing was quiet, the water running clear and fast. The cliffs rose around them, solid and unchanging. Carrie leaned into Frederick, feeling the warmth of him, the certainty.
What will you do now? Will you stay? Or will you go back to tracking criminals?
I will stay. I am done with that life. I want to build something here, with you.
Then, we will build it together.
He kissed the top of her head, and they stood in silence, the future stretching out before them. In the weeks that followed, they worked to expand the property. Frederick cleared brush along the riverbank, opening up space for a small dock where travelers could cross more easily. Carrie planted apple trees near the cabin, envisioning a small orchard that would bear fruit in years to come. They talked about building a larger barn, one that could shelter more horses and store more supplies. The dreams they shared were simple and practical, rooted in the land and the life they were creating. One evening in early April, a man rode into the property leading a second horse. He was older, with gray hair and a weathered face, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen much. He dismounted and approached the cabin, removing his hat. The man introduced himself as Samuel Trent, a circuit judge appointed to replace the one Ashford had murdered. He had heard their story and wanted to meet them. Carrie invited him inside, and they sat around the table while she poured coffee. Trent explained that he was traveling through the territory, assessing the damage caused by corrupt officials and trying to restore order. He had already arrested 2 land barons in neighboring counties who had used forged deeds to steal property. He thanked Carrie and Frederick for their courage in exposing Ashford, saying that their testimony had been crucial in bringing the smuggler to justice. Before he left, Trent pulled a folded document from his coat and placed it on the table. It was a deed, signed and sealed, confirming Carrie's ownership of the 20 acres by the river crossing. The forgery Ashford had created was officially voided, and her title was secure. Carrie stared at the document, her hands trembling.
Thank you.
Trent nodded, replaced his hat, and rode away. Carrie held the deed in her hands, reading it over and over, the weight of fear and uncertainty finally lifting. Frederick took her hands in his, the deed between them.
It is yours. No one can take it from you now.
It is ours.
He smiled, and she saw in his eyes the same certainty she felt. They were building something together, and it was solid and real. As spring turned to summer, the land bloomed. The garden produced vegetables, and the apple trees took root. The river crossing became a regular stop for travelers, and Carrie and Frederick offered food and shelter to those who needed it. They built a reputation for fairness and hospitality, and the small property by the river became a place people knew they could trust. One afternoon in late June, a wagon rolled up to the cabin. A family traveling west stopped to rest, and Carrie fed them while Frederick tended to their horses. The father, a tall man with sunburned skin, asked if they knew of any land for sale nearby. Frederick told him about parcels to the south, near the railroad survey line, and gave him directions to the land office in town. The family thanked them and continued on their way. When they were gone, Carrie turned to Frederick, her face thoughtful.
There will be more like them. The railroad is coming, and people will follow.
Then, we will be ready.
They spent the rest of the summer preparing. Frederick built a second structure, a small guest house where travelers could sleep. Carrie expanded the garden and began preserving food for the winter. They worked long days, but the work was satisfying, and at night they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the cliffs. In August, a letter arrived from the federal marshal. He wrote to inform them that Horace Ashford had been executed, and his estate had been liquidated. The money seized from his accounts was being distributed to the people he had wronged, including Carrie. She would receive compensation for the years of harassment and the attempted theft of her land. The amount was substantial, enough to secure their future and expand the property further. Carrie read the letter to Frederick, her voice calm. When she finished, she folded the paper and set it aside.
We can use this to build the barn. And the dock. And maybe buy more land to the west.
We can do whatever you want.
What I want is to keep building. With you.
Then that is what we will do.
They spent the fall expanding the property. The new barn rose quickly, large enough to shelter a dozen horses. The dock was completed, sturdy and solid, and the river crossing became easier for travelers to navigate. Frederick hired workers from town to help with the heavy labor, and Carrie oversaw the construction, her sharp eye catching mistakes before they became problems. By the time winter arrived again, the property had transformed. What had been a small cabin and a broken barn was now a thriving homestead, a place where people could rest and recover on their journey west. Carrie and Frederick stood on the porch one evening in late November, watching the first snow fall. The land stretched out before them, peaceful and whole. Frederick put his arm around Carrie, pulling her close.
We did it.
We did.
She looked up at him, her green eyes bright in the fading light.
I never thought I would have this. A home. A future. Someone to share it with.
I never thought I would either. But here we are.
He kissed her, slow and gentle, and the snow fell around them, soft and quiet. They had survived the storm, the danger, the lies. They had stood together when everything tried to tear them apart. And now, in the stillness of winter, they had built something that no one could take away. A life. A love. A home. The winter passed quietly. Snow covered the cliffs, and the river crossing froze over, limiting travel. Carrie and Frederick spent the short days working inside, mending tools and planning for spring. At night they sat by the fire, and Frederick taught Carrie to read maps, tracing routes across the territory with his finger. She learned quickly, her sharp mind absorbing the information, and soon she could identify landmarks and estimate distances as well as he could. They talked about the future, about expanding the homestead into a proper way station for travelers. Frederick wanted to build a stable large enough for 20 horses, and Carrie wanted to add a small store where people could buy supplies. The dreams were practical and achievable, and they made plans with care, calculating costs and timelines. In January, a blizzard struck. The wind howled for 3 days, piling snow against the cabin walls and burying the fences. Carrie and Frederick stayed inside, keeping the fire fed and the animals sheltered. On the third night, when the wind finally died, they stood at the window and looked out at the transformed landscape. Everything was white and still. The world remade.
We will have to dig out tomorrow.
We will. But tonight, we rest.
He pulled her close, and they stood together in the warmth of the cabin, grateful for shelter and each other. When spring returned, the land thawed, and the river ran high with snowmelt. Travelers began to arrive again, and the homestead grew busy. Carrie and Frederick worked from dawn to dusk, tending to guests and maintaining the property. The guest house was full most nights, and Carrie prepared meals for a steady stream of families heading west. Frederick managed the horses, shoeing them and repairing wagons. The work was hard, but it was good. One afternoon in April, a man arrived on foot, his clothes torn and his face bruised. He stumbled into the yard, and Frederick caught him before he fell. Carrie brought water and bandages, and they helped him inside. The man, whose name was Daniel, said he had been attacked by bandits on the road south of town. They had taken his horse and his supplies, leaving him for dead. He had walked for 2 days to reach the homestead. Frederick tended to his wounds while Carrie prepared food. When Daniel was stable, Frederick rode into Whispering Pines to report the attack to the sheriff. The sheriff organized a posse, and Frederick joined them. They rode south, following the trail Daniel had described, and found the bandit camp hidden in a narrow canyon. The fight was brief and brutal. The bandits were outnumbered and poorly armed, and they surrendered quickly. Frederick recovered Daniel's horse and supplies, along with stolen goods from other travelers. The posse brought the bandits back to town, where they were jailed to await trial. Frederick returned to the homestead late that night, tired, but unharmed. Carrie met him at the door, her relief evident.
You are safe.
I am safe.
She held him tight, and he wrapped his arms around her, the tension draining from his body. They stood in the doorway for a long moment, the night quiet around them. Daniel stayed at the homestead for a week, recovering from his injuries. When he was strong enough to leave, he thanked Carrie and Frederick and offered to pay for their hospitality. Carrie refused the money, but Frederick suggested he spread the word about the homestead to other travelers. Daniel promised he would, and he rode away on his recovered horse, waving as he disappeared down the trail. In the weeks that followed, more travelers arrived. many of them saying they had heard about the homestead from Daniel or others who had stayed there. The reputation of the place grew, and Carrie and Frederick found themselves at the center of a small but thriving community. They hired 2 workers from town, a young man named Ben and a woman named Sarah, to help with the daily tasks. Ben worked in the stable, and Sarah helped Carrie with cooking and cleaning. The extra hands made the work manageable, and the homestead continued to expand. By summer, Frederick had completed the large stable, and Carrie had opened the small store she had envisioned. The store sold basic supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, tools, rope. Travelers appreciated the convenience, and the store became a steady source of income. Carrie kept meticulous records, tracking inventory and sales, and Frederick marveled at her attention to detail. One evening in July, they sat on the porch after a long day, watching the sun set over the river. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and the air was warm and still. Carrie leaned against Frederick, her head on his shoulder.
Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had not met?
I do. I think I would still be drifting, looking for something I could not name.
And I would still be alone, fighting everyone who tried to take what was mine.
We were both lost, and then we found each other.
We did.
He kissed the top of her head, and they sat in silence, the peace of the moment settling over them. In August, a federal surveyor arrived at the homestead. He was mapping the railroad route, and he needed to document the river crossing. Carrie and Frederick showed him the property, and he spent 2 days taking measurements and making notes. Before he left, he told them that the railroad would pass within 5 miles of the homestead, and a depot would be built nearby. The news was significant. The railroad would bring more travelers, more trade, more opportunity. Carrie and Frederick discussed the implications late into the night, weighing the benefits and challenges. They decided to expand again, adding a larger dining hall and more guest rooms. The work would take months, but they had the resources and the determination. By fall, construction was underway. Frederick supervised the building, working alongside hired carpenters to raise the frame of the new dining hall. Carrie managed the daily operations of the homestead, keeping everything running smoothly while the construction progressed. The work was exhausting, but they pushed forward, driven by the vision of what the place could become. One afternoon in October, a woman rode into the property alone. She was young, perhaps in her 20s, with blonde hair and a determined expression. She dismounted and approached Carrie, who was working in the garden. The woman introduced herself as Emily, and she said she was looking for work. She had grown up on a farm in Missouri, and she knew how to cook, clean, and manage livestock. Carrie saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation she had felt years ago, and she hired her on the spot. Emily proved to be a capable worker, and she quickly became part of the small team that kept the homestead running. In November, the dining hall was completed. It was a large, open space with long tables and a stone fireplace at one end. Carrie organized a small celebration to mark the occasion, inviting the workers and a few families from town. They served roasted chicken and fresh bread, and the room filled with laughter and conversation. Frederick stood at the head of the table, raising a glass of cider.
To new beginnings.
Everyone echoed the toast, and Carrie smiled, her heart full. The homestead had grown beyond anything she had imagined, and she knew it was only the beginning. As winter approached again, the pace of work slowed. Travelers became less frequent, and the homestead settled into a quieter rhythm. Carrie and Frederick spent more time together, walking along the river or sitting by the fire. They talked about the future, about the possibility of starting a family, about the life they were building. One evening in December, Frederick took Carrie's hand and led her outside. The snow was falling lightly, dusting the ground and the trees. They walked to the barn, where the door hung open, framed by the falling snow. Frederick stopped in the doorway and turned to face her.
I have something to say.
What is it?
I love you. I have loved you since the day you stood in front of Ashford and refused to back down. I love your strength, your courage, your stubbornness. I love the way you fight for what is yours, and the way you never give up. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this place, building a future. Will you marry me?
Carrie stared at him, her breath catching. The snow fell around them, soft and silent, and the world seemed to hold still.
Yes. Yes. I will marry you.
He pulled her into his arms, and they kissed, the cold forgotten. When they finally pulled apart, Carrie was crying, tears streaming down her face.
I never thought I would have this. Someone who sees me, who understands me, who stays.
I will always stay.
They stood together in the barn doorway, holding each other as the snow fell, and the truth they had both been holding finally spoken out loud. The homestead stretched out behind them, solid and real, a testament to everything they had survived and everything they had built. And in that moment, surrounded by snow and light and love, Carrie knew that they were home. They were married in January, in the small church in Whispering Pines. The ceremony was simple, attended by the workers from the homestead, a few families from town, and the sheriff who had helped them bring down Ashford. Carrie wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with lace at the collar. And Frederick wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed. The preacher spoke briefly about commitment and faith, and Frederick and Carrie exchanged vows they had written themselves.
I promise to stand beside you, in hardship and in joy, to protect what we have built, and to build what is yet to come.
I promise to trust you, to fight alongside you, to never give up on us or on this life we are making together.
When the preacher pronounced them married, Frederick kissed Carrie, and the small congregation erupted in applause. They walked out of the church hand in hand into the cold, bright afternoon and rode back to the homestead together. That night, they celebrated with a small dinner in the new dining hall. Sarah and Emily had prepared a feast, roasted venison and potatoes and fresh bread, and everyone ate and talked late into the evening. Ben played a fiddle he had brought from town, and the music filled the room, lively and warm. Carrie and Frederick danced, her hand in his, moving in slow circles near the fireplace.
This is the happiest I have ever been.
This is only the beginning.
She smiled, and he pulled her closer, and they danced until the fire burned low and the guests began to leave. When everyone had gone, they stood alone in the dining hall, the room quiet and still. Frederick took Carrie's hand and led her outside, into the cold night. The stars were bright overhead, scattered across the dark sky, and the snow on the ground reflected their light. They walked to the edge of the property, where the cliffs dropped away and the river ran far below. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and cold water.
Do you remember the first time we stood here?
I do. You told me you would help me, and I did not believe you.
And now?
Now I believe you. Now I know you.
He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood together, looking out over the land they had fought for and won. The homestead was theirs, built with their own hands, defended against every threat. And the future stretched out before them, wide and open, full of possibility. In the spring, the railroad crews arrived. They set up camp a few miles west of the homestead, and the sound of hammers and saws echoed across the valley. Frederick rode out to meet the foreman, offering the homestead as a place where workers could buy supplies and get a hot meal. The foreman agreed, and soon the homestead was busier than ever. Workers came in groups of 10 or 20, tired and hungry, and Carrie and her team fed them quickly and efficiently. The store sold tools and rope and tobacco, and the stable housed their horses. The income from the railroad crews was steady and substantial, and Carrie began saving for further expansion. One afternoon in April, a man arrived at the homestead alone. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with gray hair and a lined face. He introduced himself as Judge William Hartley, the territorial judge who had disappeared the previous year. Frederick recognized the name immediately, and he brought the man inside, offering him a seat and a drink. Judge Hartley explained that he had been investigating Ashford when he disappeared. Ashford's men had ambushed him on the road and held him captive for months, moving him from place to place to keep him hidden. He had finally escaped in the chaos after Ashford's arrest, and he had spent the winter recovering in a settlement to the north. Now, he had returned to finish his work, to ensure that Ashford's network was completely dismantled. Frederick told him that Ashford was dead, executed months ago. The judge nodded, his expression grim. The judge said he was relieved to hear it, and he thanked Frederick for the role he had played in bringing Ashford down. He stayed at the homestead for 2 days, reviewing documents and meeting with the sheriff. Before he left, he signed an official order confirming Carrie's ownership of the property, removing any lingering legal doubt. Carrie took the document and filed it carefully with her other papers, grateful for the closure. By summer, the railroad was nearly complete. The depot was built 5 miles west of the homestead, a small but sturdy structure with a platform and a ticket office. The first train arrived in July, carrying passengers and freight, and the sound of the whistle echoed across the valley. Carrie and Frederick rode out to see it, standing on the platform as the train pulled in, massive and powerful.
Everything is changing.
It is. But we are ready.
The railroad brought more travelers, more trade, more opportunity. The homestead became a hub, a place where people stopped to rest before continuing their journey. Carrie expanded the store again, adding shelves and stocking more goods. Frederick built a second stable, larger than the first, to accommodate the increase in horses. They hired more workers, and the small team grew into a full staff. In August, Carrie discovered she was pregnant. She told Frederick one evening after dinner, sitting on the porch in the warm summer air. He stared at her, silent for a long moment, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight.
We are going to have a child.
We are.
I did not think this was possible. I did not think I would ever have a family.
Neither did I. But here we are.
He kissed her, and they sat together in the fading light, the future unfolding before them in ways they had never imagined. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Carrie continued to work, managing the store and overseeing the staff, though Frederick insisted she take breaks and rest when she could. He became protective, hovering near her whenever she lifted anything heavy, and she tolerated his concern with patient amusement. In October, a letter arrived from the federal marshal, He wrote to inform them that the last of Ashford's associates had been arrested, and the smuggling network was completely dismantled. The territory was safer now, and the marshal thanked Frederick for his service. Frederick read the letter and set it aside, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The past was finally behind them. By November, Carrie had stopped working in the store, spending her days resting and preparing for the baby. Sarah and Emily took over most of her duties, and Frederick checked on her constantly, bringing her tea and blankets and anything she needed. One evening in late November, Carrie felt the first contractions. Frederick rode into town to fetch the doctor, a competent woman named Dr. Ellen Price, who had delivered dozens of babies in the territory. She arrived quickly, bringing her supplies, and she set up in the bedroom while Frederick paced in the dining hall, unable to sit still. The labor lasted through the night. Frederick heard Carrie's cries, and he wanted to go to her. But Dr. Price told him to stay out, that she would call him when it was time. He waited, his hands clenched, his heart pounding. Just before dawn, he heard a new sound, a baby's cry, thin and strong. Dr. Price opened the door and smiled at him. The doctor told him it was a girl, healthy and beautiful. Frederick stepped into the room and saw Carrie lying in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He moved to her side and looked down at his daughter, at her small face and dark eyes, and he felt something break open inside him. A flood of love so fierce it took his breath away.
Her name is Grace.
Grace.
He touched the baby's hand, and her tiny fingers curled around his. Carrie looked up at him, her eyes shining, and he leaned down and kissed her forehead.
You are amazing.
We did this together.
He sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Carrie, and they looked down at their daughter. The three of them together in the quiet morning light. The homestead had been built on struggle and sacrifice, on trust earned and truth spoken. And now, it was home to a new life, a new beginning, a future they would shape together. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the land in white. The river ran below the cliffs, and the wind whispered through the pines. Everything they had fought for, everything they had built, was theirs. And in that moment, holding his wife and daughter, Frederick knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. A place to belong, a family to protect, a love that would last. The winter was long and cold, but inside the homestead, warmth filled every room. Grace grew quickly, changing from a tiny newborn into a baby with bright eyes and a ready smile. Carrie recovered her strength, and by January she was back on her feet, managing the household while Sarah and Emily handled the store and kitchen. Frederick spent hours with Grace, holding her while Carrie worked, singing to her in a low voice, watching her sleep. He had never imagined he could feel this way, this complete sense of purpose and contentment. The homestead continued to thrive. The railroad brought steady business, and the store's reputation spread throughout the territory. Travelers made the homestead a planned stop, knowing they would find good food, clean rooms, and reliable supplies. In February, a merchant from Little Rock arrived with a proposal. He wanted to establish a regular supply route, delivering goods to the homestead every 2 weeks. Carrie negotiated terms, and they signed an agreement that secured consistent stock for the store. By March, the snow began to melt, and the rivers swelled with runoff. The land turned green, and wildflowers bloomed along the cliffs. Carrie took Grace outside for the first time, wrapping her in blankets and walking slowly along the property. Frederick walked beside them, his hand on Carrie's back, and they looked out over everything they had built.
She will grow up here, knowing this place, knowing what it took to keep it.
She will know that her parents fought for her, before she was even born.
And she will know love.
He nodded, and they stood together in the spring sunshine, the future bright and certain. In April, a delegation from the territorial government arrived. They were surveying the region for new towns and infrastructure, and they wanted to meet with landowners who had established successful operations. Carrie and Frederick hosted them for dinner, answering questions about water rights, supply chains, and relations with the local community. The officials were impressed by what they saw, and they promised to include the homestead in their reports. Before they left, the lead surveyor shook Frederick's hand and told him that places like this, built on hard work and integrity, were the foundation of the territory's future. In May, Ben announced that he was getting married. He had been courting a woman from town, a quiet seamstress named Clara, and they planned a small wedding at the church. Carrie and Frederick attended, bringing Grace with them, and they celebrated with the couple afterward at the homestead. The dining hall was filled with guests, and the atmosphere was joyful and loud. Ben danced with Clara, his face alight with happiness, and Frederick clapped him on the shoulder and wished him a long and happy life. Summer arrived with heat and long days. The homestead buzzed with activity, the stable full of horses, the store crowded with customers. Carrie hired 2 more workers, both young men from town who needed employment, and she trained them carefully. Frederick expanded the irrigation system, digging new channels to bring water to the vegetable garden. Grace learned to sit up, then to crawl, her curiosity boundless. She explored every corner of the house, pulling herself along the floor, reaching for everything within sight. Carrie watched her with a mixture of pride and exhaustion, chasing after her, keeping her safe. In July, a fire broke out in the stable. It started in the middle of the night, sparked by a lantern left too close to a pile of hay. Frederick woke to the smell of smoke and ran outside, shouting for help. Ben and the workers grabbed buckets and ran to the river, forming a chain to pass water up to the stable. Frederick went inside, leading the horses out one by one, his lungs burning from the smoke. Carrie stood at a distance, holding Grace, watching in terror as the flames climbed the walls. They fought the fire for 2 hours, drenching the stable until the flames finally died. The damage was severe. One wall burned through. The roof partially collapsed. But the horses were safe, and no one was injured. Frederick stood in the dawnlight, covered in soot and ash, staring at the wreckage. Carrie came to him and took his hand.
We will rebuild.
I know.
We always do.
He looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, and he nodded. They spent the next 2 months rebuilding the stable, stronger than before. Frederick designed it with fire breaks and stone supports, and they installed metal brackets for the lanterns. By September, the new stable was complete, larger and safer, and the horses were moved back in. The homestead had survived another challenge, and the staff felt a renewed sense of pride in their work. In October, Carrie received a letter from a lawyer in Fort Smith. He represented a group of investors who wanted to buy the homestead, offering a substantial sum. Carrie read the letter twice, then set it aside. She had no intention of selling, but the offer confirmed what she already knew. The homestead was valuable, a proven success in a territory still finding its footing. She wrote a polite refusal and sent it back the same day. By winter, Grace was a year old. She had taken her first steps in November, wobbling across the floor into Frederick's arms, and now she walked everywhere, her steps unsteady but determined. She had Carrie's dark hair and Frederick's blue eyes, and she laughed easily, a bright sound that filled the house. On the anniversary of their wedding, Carrie and Frederick stood together in the barn doorway again, watching the snow fall. Grace was asleep inside, cared for by Sarah, and they had a few moments alone.
Do you remember what you said to me here, a year ago?
I remember everything.
I told you I would always stay.
And you have.
I will stay, as long as you will have me.
Then, you will stay forever.
He kissed her, and they held each other in the cold night air, the snow falling around them, the homestead solid and warm behind them. Everything they had fought for was theirs, and everything they had built would be Grace's one day. The past was behind them, the truth spoken and settled, and the future stretched out before them, full of light and love, and the life they had chosen together.